Hi, welcome to the University of Lincoln. My name is Chris Headleand, and these are going to be my best advice for writing a personal statement for university. So, first thing first, you need to decide on the content you actually want to include in your personal statement. And that might not be everything about your life. You want to try and keep your personal statements relatively targeted and relatively focused. Um, So start off by thinking, why are you applying? So why are you looking to undertake this very specific area of study? What about it excites you, and what are your ambitions? Where do you want to go, and how is this course going to help you get there? Have a think about not only why you're applying for that program, but why you're applying to. If you're looking for certain sorts of universities, maybe location or some sort of history around that university, think about that in your application. Try and make sure that comes through in what you're writing. Next one is to look at the program description. So do you mention any specific skills or qualities that they're looking for in applicants? If you have a certain programs, so for example, computer science, may be looking for people who've demonstrated certain types of skills. So think about how you weave that into your application. Certainly, I know a lot of my colleagues who work in areas like medicine and social care look for very specific qualities, humanistic qualities in their applicants. So try and make sure that comes through. In your program descriptions, the university website is always going to be a fantastic resource to kind of find that information out. And again, this applies perfectly well to applying for a job, writing a cover letter. It applies equally well. You're always going to want to target your application at the people who are going to read it. So look at what they're, look for the kind of qualities that they're looking for. Think about why you're suitable. And again, don't just think about the program, but think about the careers it may lead to. What about you makes you an ideal computer scientist, makes you a brilliant physicist? What about you has led you on this path? And again, this works equally well for writing an application for a job and writing any application for any degree that you may be going for. One thing that we want to look at when we're looking at your personal statements is, what does it say about you, and why are you somebody that we want to have on this program? Talk about your experience. So have you had any work experience, or have you undertaken some sort of challenges? Duke of Edinburgh Awards are a really good example of this. What have you done that have helped you kind of develop we sometimes call them soft skills, but your more kind of interpersonal communication skills, things that are going to help you succeed, especially in teamwork environments. Something that we don't always talk about as much as we should. University is a collaborative experience. You're not just working on your own. You're working with other students. You will be working with academics, maybe postdocs or PhD students. You need to think about how your experience has prepared you for that kind of world of study, which can be quite different. I think we get used to learning relatively independently, and this tends to not be how university works. It's a much more collaborative, much more interpersonal environment. So things like your communication skills, your group work skills, we want to see those come through in your personal statement. Talk about your extracurricular study. So hopefully by this point you will have engaged with some extracurricular study. Have you been involved in any kind of after school clubs? Any maybe you're learning an instrument? Like me, I play guitar, and I learn quite a lot through applying myself to other forms of study. It teaches me how to learn better, but also that there's general skills that I learn through that process that I can apply to a range of disciplines. So think about how you've shown your interest and how you've shown your ability to learn through extracurricular engagement. Think about, have you done any taster sessions at university? Have you been involved in any, like say, challenges? So sometimes, at least when I was at school, I did some inter-school challenges. We built robots and we fought them against another school. Think about things that you've done that really show off your ability to learn, that really highlight your skills in the best way possible. Talk about your interests. So again, part of the personal statement is personal. We want to know about you. We want to know what makes you tick, and we want to see that you have a life outside study as well. There's something that makes you a well-rounded individual. Clubs and societies, hobbies, anything that gives an admissions officer insight into who you are. So again, if you're really into playing musical instruments, if you're in a band, tell us. Anything that kind of advances you as a person, anything that shows that you are interested in developing your skills and kind of moving them to another level. Things that show that you have interests outside of just the study environment. For example, when I was going through secondary school and when I was going through sixth form, I was really into whitewater kayaking, and I put that in my personal statement. But the one big thing here is you need to always relate interest back to the program you're applying for. You need to show how these interests have helped you develop your skills. So, for example, with me, with my whitewater kayaking, you always do it as a group. So I was talking about how I learned leadership skills. I talked about how I learned things like first aid. I did my first aid course. I did teaching courses. I learned how to teach other people how to kayak. I worked in a very close, trusted environment. I was in a band in sixth form, and I talked about how that had given me confidence. I'd stood on stage, I'd sung, I'd done all these kind of things that scared me, but I got through them, and it gave the admissions officer an idea about who I was as a person. One thing I really advise, and it's if I was to give a top tip, this would be it. Avoid cliches here. And the big one is my favorite thing to do is socializing with friends. We all like socializing with friends. In common world, I'd be socializing with my friends, most evenings. Obviously that isn't possible with the current national global situation as it is. But think about what that says about you. Socializing with friends doesn't really say anything about who you are or what your interests actually are. So Tommy says, how long should a personal statement be? Now I'm going to come up to that in slightly later. There's some very specific guidance. But as a general rule, a personal statement, you should get rid of anything that doesn't really add something to your story. And I'll talk about stories in a second. But don't put stuff in there for the sake of having it there. You want to make this as concise, as succinct, and really as strong a story as you can. As admissions officers, we have a lot of these to read, especially on a big course like ours. Computer science at Lincoln, we take around 300 undergraduates, and we get a lot more students applying. So I don't have huge amounts of time to read personal statements. I want to read something punchy, something to the point, something that tells me about that individual straight off. So the next one is educational performance. And this is something that quite often gets asked when we get students coming for open days. Maybe you've had some sort of challenge with your performance. Maybe you've had something that's impacted your ability to commit yourself to your studies. Now, your personal statement is an opportunity to let the program team know about that and explain maybe like a blip in your academic performance. Maybe your AS levels were a lot stronger than your A2s, or maybe there was something in your BTECs. Maybe there's one exam that you hadn't quite performed as well as, This is an opportunity to explain those blips away. But I say this with a word of caution, and it's quite a serious word of caution. Nobody's going to be interested in hearing excuses. No one wants to hear you trying to excuse away poor performance. However, if you have a genuine reason, talk about that, but talk about that with a positive spin. If you have had an exam that hasn't gone quite as well as you've wanted, what have you done subsequently to make that better? If we accept you as a student, how are you going to make the most of your experience at university? So, for example, I had an exam that I thought I was going to do really well in, but I had a personal tragedy around that time, and I didn't perform as well in that exam as I wanted to. In my personal statement, I mentioned that, But I also said, look, but this is all the things I've done since. I've committed myself back to this. I've joined some after school groups to learn more about this subject, and I've committed myself to extracurricular. And over summer, I was doing more projects in that subject area, which was designed for anybody who's interested. That's a really interesting story. Knowing how you've responded to a challenge, knowing how you've responded and how you've made improvements is really interesting. That tells me something about you. That tells me that you have perseverance. That tells me that you have resilience. And those are really positive personal traits. But don't use your personal statement as a way of excusing poor performance. But it can be used as a way of explaining where you've had challenges. So once you've collected all this content and you know roughly what's going to be in your statement, it's time to write it. And this is a general approach I tend to advise with writing statements. And again, as I mentioned with the other area, this applies equally well to if you're writing a cover letter for a job, but it is targeted at writing personal statements. So start with bullet points. Take all your information from the previous activity. We've collected all this cool content about you, and then start writing them as single bullet points. Now, if you're doing this on a word processor on a computer, this is really easy because you can then shuffle these bullet points until you have a structure that you like. One thing that's really important is this idea of narrative, which I'll come onto in a second. One bit of your story should lead into the next. I want to know about your journey. I don't want to be bouncing backwards and forwards through it because that can be really confusing to read. As I'm reading about a personal statement, I want to know about someone's journey. Because for me, this is the bit that I get to find out what trajectory you're on. By trajectory, I mean, this path through life that you're taking. The personal statement should detail enough of that so I can get some impression of, right, once this person arrives at university, this is where they're going to go. And that can help me not only just decide whether to accept you onto the course or not, but also to decide, okay, what kind of things do I need to put in to support this student as best as possible? So make sure your bullet points lead into each other. And like I say, spend some time just trying different structures, trying different orders. Maybe take it to a friend or a family member and seeing what they think of your structure. But start with these bullet points. It can be really intimidating to look at a blank page and think, right, I've got to fill this with words. Let's say for me, that I find that really overwhelming. But starting with bullet points, really short points where you can just discuss, take that content that you've collected and put them in some sort of structure. And it's really easy to expand bullet points into more fuller statements or paragraphs. And I mentioned narrative before. Make sure you're telling a story. What is the narrative of you? Once I've read that and think about this, what do you want people to know about you after reading this statement? What's the one takeaway message? What's the one thing that they really want to? Are you just a super resilient, committed learner? Are you a future leader? Are you somebody who's demonstrated they have leadership abilities and somebody who's going to be a real driver in their community? Are you incredibly community focused? Are you somebody who works and supports others around them? What is the story about you that you want me to come away with? What makes your journey unique? A personal statement, and like I said, like all good narratives, should have progression. I should be able to see how your story has built up over time, and that gives me a kind of way of not predicting, but kind of anticipating where you might go once you arrive on the program. And again, this is the same as a cover letter for a job. I want to read that cover letter and think, right, once this person arrives with my business, this is where they're going to go. It's exactly the same. Think about making that narrative as positive and proactive as you possibly can. We want to get a sense of where have you been, but importantly, we want to know where you want to go, because we want to see whether we're the right fit for you as well. We want to see how we can support you best. Read it aloud. This is the best piece of advice I give for anyone. And this applies to writing essays, dissertations, PhD theses. As I'm sure some of my PhD students will be watching this. Sometimes sentences can look really good on paper. And I'm sure we've all done this. You spend time thinking of that perfect sentence. It sounds really mature, really grown up. You've gone through the thesaurus and you found all the really big words and you've written this down. But when you read it, it sounds completely nonsensical. It doesn't sound like a sentence a human would ever say. So read everything out aloud. Trust me, your ears are really good at picking up these things. One of the best ways to sound natural is to write in a similar way to the way you talk. Because you're probably quite good at talking. You've been doing it most of your life. So think about how you write and try and follow that same sort of structure, flow, and pace. And reading aloud is a really, really good way to do that. And other things that really jump out if you're reading out loud, if you're using the same word too many times, little kind of errors that you're told to pick up on in writing, you find them a lot easier when you're reading them out loud. Record yourself. This is something that I've done for years, and it's kind of a top tip for writing. I often think of the perfect sentence in my head. I think, right, this is exactly how I'm going to say this message. And by the time I've committed myself to picking up a pen or open up word processor, it's kind of gone. That I think faster than I type. You know, it's true. You know, we all do. We think much faster than we type. But recording can be really useful. So what I have is I've got a memo application on my phone. I have most computers now are built in with some sort of voice recording facility. One thing I suggest is think of what you want to write and say it, record it, and then type out what you've said. You can almost dictate to yourself. I find this a really great way of making sure the structure works quite well. And again, like I say, you can play this back to yourself, write it down, but it's a really good way of, again, hearing how somebody else is going to read your work. Be natural. Don't try to sound like somebody you aren't. Avoid cliches wherever possible. You are unique, and you'll want your university to know that. Lean into your strengths. Again, I call it thesaurus bashing. You know, we get the statements or, again, essays, dissertations, theses, where people have gone through this thesaurus, they've found these words that sound really complex and really convoluted. Cool, that's a great word. People will be really impressed. It just sounds unnatural, and it doesn't give me a sense of who you are. And again, lean into that. You have a unique background. You have a unique set of experiences. We want you to come to the university. So try and stand out as the individual that you are. And that's all you need to be. Be enthusiastic. Try and maintain a positive message throughout your personal statement. Everything, and I mentioned this briefly when I was talking about academic performance. Everything should have a positive spin. Everything should show, okay, even if you've had a challenge, and actually one of the best personal statements I've ever read focused on a major challenge in this individual's life. But it was all a statement about overcoming that and how they'd driven themselves forward and how they'd taken that challenge and succeeded. Actually, one of my favorite kind of examples of this was my MSc thesis. Actually, the first sentence in my MSc thesis talked about a paper it had rejected. And that entire kind of challenge was what set me on a specific journey. And that can be a really powerful way to do things, but be enthusiastic, be positive, and show how you are, how your journey has committed you to university. Or again, like I say, these apply equally to jobs. If you're coming in for a job, I want to know that you're committed and that you're enthusiastic for it. We want to see people who are excited to come and learn. And another question just come in. Should I talk about organizations I aspire to work for in the future? Yes, you can do. I would kind of think about how specific you want to be about that. So in many cases, a field is more appropriate than a specific organization. If you have your heart set on a very, very specific company, then maybe, you might think, you may see something in a course and think, right, this is absolutely the perfect fit for me. If I don't know that company as well as you do, and if this has been your objective, for a few years, you probably will know that specific company better than I do. It may be hard for me to see the alignment. However, some organizations you can see clear links. I mean, at University of Lincoln, we do a lot of work with some very specific computing companies, and we know a lot about those. We have graduates who go to work for some very specific locations. And actually mentioning those could be really positive. But again, talk about your dreams, talk about where you want to be, where you want to go. And, if you really want to be, for example, we had one student who really wanted to work in the Formula One. And they stated that in their personal statement. And they made that their mission while they were at university. And that told us a lot about that student. They had a very specific drive, very specific goal. They wanted to work in data science and Formula One. Great. Okay. We know where you want to be and we know how to help you. Okay. So yeah, it can be really positive. Follow the guidance. Remember that you have a really strict character guidance, which I think at the moment is 4,000 words. I can't remember how many lines. I think 20 something lines. But you have a very specific character limit and line limit for the UCAS system. But the one thing to remember about this, if you type this up in your word processor, depending on how your word processor picks up on individual characters, it may give you a different character limit. So one thing you can try, there are tools online which can give you very, very precise character limits. So do test it. The other side is 4,000 characters sounds like a lot. It's really not. Which is why I said be concise, cut out the waffle. If there's extraneous things in there that you don't think add to your narrative and add to your story and don't kind of show me that journey, cut it out. Just remove it and leave space for stuff that you want to go into in more detail. Proofread. This is, if you learn nothing from this talk other than this, it is to proofread. The best way to do this, I honestly believe, is to have a friend or family member proofread the statement for you. They will often spot things that you have missed, such as cliches and unusual language choices. Or, for example, in this presentation, I've got proof-read. Should have proofread it. But proofread your statements. I've had people put in words that have completely changed the context of their statement accidentally. And it has been very, very funny. But it probably hasn't sold the message that individual wanted to sell. But also, one of the really good things you can do with proofreading is you can give your statement to somebody and say, what does this tell you about me? What's your takeaway message? And if they read it and go, this says that you are person X. If that aligns with what you were intending to get out of that, brilliant. Somebody independent has read it and they've told, you've sold the message that you wanted to sell. But if they don't, if they come away with a different message, you know that you might need to go and revisit that statement. Which is what the other reason I would always advise, have a range of proofreaders. Find a bunch of people that you can show this to. So somebody with fresh eyes, and by fresh eyes, I mean somebody who's never read this before. They can look at this and say, right, this is what I think of this statement. But I mean this as strongly as I can. This is your statement and it should read about you. If you feel very, very strongly that you want to include a very specific anecdote or piece of experience, and maybe somebody advises you that they don't like it, that is ultimately your decision. You will know what you want this to say about you. Make it your statement. Take all the advice you can, but make your mind up at the end of it. And that is really, really important because, like I say, one of the big things that we want to get from a personal statement is a good measure of you, who you are, why you're going to be a great fit for this university. So, international. So I've tried to write this fairly generically. So if you are a UK student looking at studying overseas, or an international student looking at studying in the UK, I'm hoping this advice will be equally useful. However, Bear in mind that every country has their own application system, and you'll need to familiarize yourself with that application system. Now, for example, if you wanted to come study in the UK, if you want to come study at the University of Lincoln, we have an international office who can offer absolutely fantastic advice. And I would generally recommend, if you're thinking about coming to study in the UK, get in touch with the university that you're interested in. They can talk you through the process. They can help you understand UCAS. Um, like all things, if you understand the system, it's fairly straightforward. But if you're new to the system, it can be quite confusing. So, best bit of advice to give, and again, if you're looking at studying overseas, or if you're an international student looking at studying in the UK, the best bit of advice I can give: contact the university that you're interested in studying with. And like I say, the University of Lincoln, we have a fantastic international office. Do get in contact; they'll give you all the advice you need. So the first thing I think you should think about when writing your personal statement is, why do you want to study in another country? I always think this is a really interesting question. And I see this a lot in especially in people who apply for research degrees, but also people looking to study in undergraduate computer science as well. It's really interesting knowing why you want to come to the country that you want to study at. In our case, why do you want to come to the UK? Why do you want to come to England? Why do you want to come to Lincolnshire? That's really interesting to know. I want to know why here? Why not a different university in somewhere else? In your home country, or France, Germany. Why do you want to come here? Being an international student is a very specific commitment, and it's quite different to being a home student. And knowing that journey, knowing why you've committed to studying in another country, is really interesting, and I think it says a lot about you as an individual. So explain that. Talk about you. What are the experiences that you're looking for? Are you looking to immerse yourself in a very specific culture? Are you looking at working in a specific sector, and maybe a degree from a certain university or for a certain country is going to help you achieve that objective? That's really interesting. And being upfront about your motives, being upfront about your interests, really, really helpful. And again, it really gives a lot of insight into your application. And like I say, always talk with specific reference to the country that you're applying for. And this might sound obvious, but just quite a lot of personal statements of, I just want to go overseas. Okay, but why here? There's a whole bunch of countries out there. Why do you want to come to this one? And specifically, why do you want to come to this university at this one? It's a really interesting part of your journey. We really want to know that. And like I say, it says a lot about your objectives, and that is a really useful thing in the personal statement. The second bit of advice is language skills. Talk about your language abilities honestly, and experiences that you may have had developing those language skills. So have you done any private tutorage? Have you worked in an organization where you've been required to use multiple languages? Have you taken any tests? Have you demonstrated your competency in some way? So again, we see some students who have worked with a specific organization or volunteer organization, have had huge amounts of experience developing their language skills, communication. That's really, really useful to know. Beyond anything else, it helps us understand, if we do accept you, what extra support, what extra help can we offer you? And again, most universities will have some additional language support. I mean, at the University of Lincoln, we have an English language centre that is really well set up, and they work very closely with our international office. And again, talking quite honestly about your skills, how you're practicing, how you are developing your communication skills, fantastic. And again, talking about that kind of stuff may help us direct you towards additional support if you need it. And again, the same if you are a UK student looking to study overseas. How are you developing those skills? Are you doing stuff in your own time? I mean, there's so many opportunities to develop language skills now, I think more than we've ever had before. So do have a look at those opportunities and try and develop and explain that in your personal statement. So this has been my top tips for how to write a personal statement. Thank you for all the questions that came in. By all means, my name is Chris Headleand. I'm an associate professor and I'm the school director of teaching and learning at the School of Computer Science. If you have any questions, if you want to know any more about this, feel free to drop me an email. I'm going to try and just throw my email up on screen. There we go. If you have anything you want to ask, just drop me an email. I will direct you to the right person in the organization. But like I say, if you have any further questions, do get in touch. More than happy to talk to you. Thank you for watching.